In the history of intelligence, failure is almost always explained through betrayal. A source defects, an agent is compromised, someone speaks when silence was required. Betrayal is convenient because it gives failure a clear cause and a human face. During the Cold War, this explanation became almost automatic. When intelligence collapsed, someone must have caused it. But there was one case that deeply unsettled analysts precisely because no betrayal could be found. No agent defected. No documents were leaked. No classified material appeared in hostile hands. Communication channels remained secure, and internal audits revealed no penetration. The system, by every technical measure, was intact. And yet a critical intelligence advantage quietly disappeared. At first, nothing appeared wrong. Collection systems continued to function normally. Reports arrived on schedule. Analysts reviewed familiar data streams and detected no disruption. From the outside, the intelligence apparatus looked disciplined, professional and stable. That appearance delayed recognition of the problem. Intelligence systems are designed to detect intrusion, disruption, and sudden change. They are not designed to recognize gradual loss of relevance. When intelligence stops influencing decisions slowly and without noise, it often goes unnoticed. The first signs were subtle. Assessments that once shaped policy began to lose urgency. Strategic warnings were acknowledged, then postponed. Recommendations were discussed, then deferred. Intelligence still existed, still appeared accurate, still followed proper analytical standards, but it no longer moved events. This raised an uncomfortable question inside the system. If the intelligence was correct, why was it no longer effective? Initial concern remained contained. Quiet reviews were ordered and framed as routine evaluations rather than crisis response. Analysts re-examined sources, collection methods, and analytical frameworks. Nothing appeared compromised. No external manipulation could be identified. No hostile penetration explained the decline. The absence of betrayal was confirmed. That absence made the situation more disturbing. As the review widened, analysts began comparing current assessments, with older reports addressing the same strategic issues. The facts were largely unchanged. The environment was familiar, but the tone had shifted noticeably. Earlier reports expressed judgment. They offered conclusions. They accepted uncertainty and still guided action. Newer assessments were careful, conditional, and restrained. Possibilities replaced direction. Probability replaced recommendation. Language softened. Urgency faded. This change had not been ordered. It had emerged gradually. Over time, analysts learned that strong conclusions carried risk. Being wrong damaged credibility. Hesitation rarely did. Each remembered mistake weighed heavier than each ignored warning. The system slowly optimized itself for defensibility rather than influence. Intelligence did not fail suddenly. It faded. And what made this failure especially dangerous was that it looked responsible. Every adjustment made sense in isolation. Each reduction in certainty seemed prudent. Together, they drained intelligence of its power without triggering alarm. No betrayal was required. The system weakened itself. As the internal review expanded, investigators stopped looking for compromise and began examining behavior. If no one had betrayed the system, then the failure had to exist somewhere between analysis and decision. The problem was not what intelligence collected, but how it was interpreted and used. This shift exposed a deeper pattern. Over several years, the relationship between analysts and decision-makers had changed. Leaders increasingly demanded higher confidence before acting. Analysts responded by narrowing their conclusions. Narrow conclusions reduced influence. Reduced influence led to further demands for certainty. A quiet feedback loop formed. Each step appeared reasonable. No one wanted to escalate based on incomplete information. No one wanted to be responsible for a mistake with irreversible consequences. In an environment shaped by nuclear risk, caution felt like professionalism. But caution accumulated. Analysts began reviewing how assessments were written. Early drafts often contained clear judgments. But by the time reports reached senior levels, language had softened. Strong verbs were replaced with conditional phrases. Conclusions were surrounded by caveats. The intelligence was accurate, but it no longer compelled action. This was not deception. It was self-protection. Over time, analysts learned which assessments advanced careers and which created problems. Reports that emphasized uncertainty were rarely challenged. Reports that pushed decisive interpretation were scrutinized. Delayed or quietly sidelined. The system rewarded safety over clarity. Leadership unintentionally reinforced this behavior. Requests for additional sourcing, extended verification, and cross-agency consensus slowed the process. Analysts complied by becoming more cautious. That caution further reduced urgency. The loop tightened. As intelligence lost influence, decision-makers adapted. They began relying more heavily on political judgment, precedent, and instinct. Intelligence became contextual support rather than strategic driver. It was consulted, but rarely decisive. This further weakened its role. Some senior officials noticed the erosion and attempted correction. Analysts were encouraged to speak plainly, to accept uncertainty, to offer judgment even when evidence was incomplete. But culture does not change quickly. Years of institutional caution could not be reversed by instruction alone. Trust had shifted. Analysts no longer trusted their interpretations. Leaders no longer trusted analysis without certainty. Responsibility diffused across layers of review. No one wanted to be the one who acted too soon. The most troubling realization emerged slowly. If intelligence could fail without being wrong, how would anyone know? The system still functioned. Collection remained strong. Reports were accurate. There were no visible errors to correct. And yet strategic advantage continued to slip away. Quietly and without confrontation. This kind of failure left no signal. It did not announce itself. It did not provoke reform. It did not create scandal. It hid behind professionalism, process, and restraint. By the time the pattern became clear, reversing it felt dangerous. Restoring confidence risked appearing reckless. In a system trained to avoid error, hesitation felt safer than judgment. So the system adapted. It accepted reduced influence as stability, and in doing so, allowed the failure to continue. As the pattern became clearer, analysts began to confront a disturbing possibility. The intelligence system had not simply become cautious. It had begun to distrust itself. Interpretation was no longer treated as a necessary function, but as a liability. This shift altered how analysis was produced. Instead of asking what the information suggested, analysts focused on what could be safely said. Reports were written to survive review rather than to drive decision. Language was calibrated to avoid responsibility. Judgment was fragmented into options, scenarios, and probabilities. The result was analytical paralysis. Intelligence organizations are designed to reduce uncertainty, not to preserve it. Yet uncertainty became institutionalized. Multiple interpretations were presented without prioritization. Decision makers received context, but no direction. This was framed as rigor. In reality, it was avoidance. Over time, analysts noticed that decisive interpretation no longer changed outcomes. Strong assessments did not accelerate action. They triggered review. Cautious assessments, by contrast, passed smoothly through the system. The lesson was absorbed quietly. Decisiveness carried risk. Hesitation did not. This learning reshaped institutional behavior. Analysts stopped competing to be right and started competing to be defensible. Consensus became more important than insight. Agreement replaced judgment as the primary signal of quality. Ironically, redundancy amplified the problem. Independent teams produced similar cautious conclusions, not because evidence converged, but because caution was the shared baseline. Agreement appeared to confirm accuracy, even when it was built on the same uncertainty. This created an illusion of confidence. Behind that illusion, trust continued to erode. Senior officials sensed the problem but struggled to define it. Intelligence briefings felt thorough yet unsatisfying. Risks were described but not resolved. Warnings were issued but rarely acted upon. The system appeared active, but outcomes stalled. This mismatch created frustration. Some leaders began questioning the value of intelligence altogether. If analysis could not guide action, what purpose did it serve? Intelligence became background noise, consulted out of habit rather than reliance. This was the moment when failure became systemic. The intelligence system was no longer shaping decisions. It was adapting to them. Instead of influencing strategy, it adjusted itself to political reality. Relevance was sacrificed for safety. No external pressure caused this shift. It emerged from within. The Cold War environment amplified the effect. With catastrophic consequences attached to error, the cost of being wrong overshadowed the cost of being late. Analysts internalized this imbalance. Over time, restraint hardened into doctrine. The most dangerous aspect was invisibility. There was no crisis to expose the failure. No dramatic mistake. No moment of reckoning. The system continued to function, and that functionality concealed the loss. Intelligence had not been defeated by an enemy. It had been neutralized by its own fear of judgment. By the time this was fully understood, the system had changed too much to easily reverse. Confidence once lost could not be restored by process or reform alone. The failure was now embedded, and it would shape every decision that followed. As the failure embedded itself deeper into the system, its consequences became structural. Intelligence agencies did not collapse. They adapted, and in that adaptation, the original purpose of intelligence slowly shifted. Decision-making timelines expanded. What once required days now required weeks. Alerts were raised later. Escalation thresholds increased. None of this was formalized. It emerged through habit, reinforced by experience. Analysts learned that urgency attracted scrutiny. Scrutiny attracted delay. Delay felt safer than responsibility. Over time, restraint became instinctive. This instinct reshaped institutional culture. New analysts entering the system were trained in an environment defined by caution. They learned to frame conclusions carefully, to emphasize uncertainty, to avoid definitive language. They were taught that intelligence was not about telling leaders what would happen, but about outlining what might happen. This training produced consistency and fragility. The system became resilient against embarrassment, but vulnerable to surprise. It could absorb ambiguity indefinitely, but it struggled to act decisively when required. The balance between vigilance and hesitation tilted quietly toward delay. Some senior officials attempted to correct the drift. Internal discussions emphasized the importance of judgment. Analysts were reminded that intelligence existed to inform action, not merely to document uncertainty. But reminders could not undo years of learned behavior. Trust could not be ordered back into existence. Another consequence emerged gradually. Intelligence agencies began measuring success differently. Avoiding error became more important than influencing outcomes. If no crisis occurred, the system believed it had succeeded. The absence of failure was treated as proof of effectiveness. This logic was flawed. It confused survival with relevance. The intelligence system was still respected, still funded, still consulted. But its role had narrowed. It informed debates without resolving them. It provided background without direction. Leaders listened, then decided elsewhere. This marginalization was not acknowledged. Admitting it would require admitting that intelligence had lost confidence in itself. That the greatest threat had not been infiltration or deception, but institutional fear. Externally, nothing exposed the failure. The Cold War continued. Tensions rose and fell. No catastrophe forced reform. The system remained operational, and that functionality masked its weakness. Internally, a quiet realization spread among experienced analysts. The system had traded decisiveness for safety. It had protected itself from being wrong at the cost of being late. This trade-off felt acceptable, until it didn't. By the late stages of the Cold War, intelligence agencies faced a paradox. They were more informed than ever before, yet less willing to trust their own conclusions. More data flowed through the system, but less meaning emerged. The failure without betrayal had matured. It no longer required fear to sustain itself. It had become routine. The failure was never acknowledged publicly. There was no admission that intelligence had lost influence. Without being compromised, no reform followed because no crime had occurred. The system continued to operate, and that continuity disguised the damage. This was the most dangerous outcome. Without betrayal, there was no culprit. Without exposure, there was no pressure to change. The failure belonged to everyone and no one at the same time. Responsibility dissolved into process. Over time, intelligence agencies adjusted to their reduced role. Analysts became more cautious, language more precise, conclusions more restrained. These changes reduced the risk of catastrophic error, but they also reduced impact. Intelligence became safe, and safety replaced authority. Decision-makers adapted. They stopped expecting intelligence to lead. Instead, they treated it as one input among many. Political judgment, precedent, and instinct carried greater weight. Intelligence informed decisions, but rarely shaped them. This shift was subtle and irreversible. The most unsettling realization came in hindsight. The intelligence system had not been defeated by an enemy. It had been weakened by its own logic. Fear of being wrong became more powerful than fear of missing the moment. That fear reshaped behavior more effectively than any hostile operation could have. In later years, internal studies quietly referenced the period as an example of overcorrection. Analysts discussed the dangers of excessive caution. They warned that restraint, taken too far, could become a form of blindness. But the lesson was difficult to apply. Once trust in judgment is lost, it cannot be restored by process alone. Confidence does not return through guidelines or reform. It requires acceptance of risk, and risk had become unacceptable. The Cold War ended without forcing this failure into the open. No crisis exposed it. No disaster demanded accountability. The system moved forward, carrying the weakness quietly into the future. This made the failure more likely to repeat, because it left no trace. Intelligence failure without betrayal does not announce itself. It hides behind professionalism, precision, and caution. It looks responsible. It feels safe, until the moment when action is required, and hesitation remains. That was the legacy of a failure with no traitor, no exposure, and no warning. A failure that did not destroy intelligence, but changed it forever.